He found an alien woman chained to a support beam in a scrap market, wrists raw, ribs showing through torn cloth, and a scavenged plank wired to the chain that read simply, "Free, nobody wants her." The trading post of Pharaoh's Drift wasn't on any official star chart. It floated in the gap between three collapsed mining claims, a rusted skeleton of docking rings and patched hab domes that legitimate shipping lanes pretended didn't exist. Dax Marrow had been coming here for 6 years, long enough to know which vendors sold real parts and which ones sold you a story instead. He moved through the crowded promenade with his order manifest glowing on his wrist slate, hunting for a single component, a fold coil regulator, second generation, compatible with his aging drive housing. Simple enough on paper. Nothing on the Drift was ever simple in practice. The promenade stretched almost a full kilometer under a patchwork ceiling of salvaged hull plating, lit by strings of mismatched work lights that buzzed and flickered like they resented being awake. Species from a dozen collapsed systems packed the walkway shoulder to shoulder, thrend scrap dealers shouting prices in 3 languages at once, a cluster of insectoid Voss traders weighing crystalline fuel cores on hand scales, a food vendor grilling something on a skewer that Dax had learned, through hard experience, never to ask about. The air smelled like ozone fried oil and the particular metallic sourness of a place where too many engines ran too close together for too many years. Dax kept his head down and his pace steady. He wasn't a smuggler. Not exactly. He preferred the word unregistered contractor, a distinction that mattered to precisely one person in the galaxy, and that person was him. He hauled goods between systems that didn't ask questions, for clients who paid in credits that didn't trace back to anywhere official. It kept his ship fed and his conscience mostly quiet. 36 years old, built like a man who'd spent 2 decades lifting cargo crates for a living, with the kind of tired eyes that came less from age and more from spending too long in too many places where nobody remembered his name past the transaction. He almost didn't see her. She was tucked at the edge of the promenade, where the vendor stalls thinned out and the deck plating gave way to raw, unfinished hull. A length of freight-grade chain ran from a heavy cuff on her wrist to a bolt sunk deep into a support beam, the kind of restraint meant to hold shipping containers steady during hard burns, not a living creature. It gave her maybe 1.5 meters of movement, not far enough to reach the shade of the nearest awning, not far enough to reach anything at all. She sat with her knees drawn to her chest and her head down, and there was a stillness to her that caught Dax's attention before the chain did. The particular kind of stillness that comes from a body that has stopped expecting anything to change. Her skin held a faded slate blue tone under a layer of grime, mottled with bruising along both forearms. Her hair, pale as frost where it wasn't matted with dust, hung forward and hid most of her face. She wore a shirt size for someone twice her frame and trousers cut ragged at the shin, both stiffened with old stains gone the color of rust. The sign hung from the chain on a loop of scavenged wire. Someone had scratched 2 words into a strip of packing plastic in trade common: free, unwanted. Dax stood there a moment taking in the whole picture, the sign, the woman, the flow of foot traffic parting around her, like she was a piece of furniture nobody had bothered to move. A cargo drone skimmed past close enough to stir her hair and didn't slow down. A pair of merchants glanced her way, made some silent calculation, and kept walking without breaking stride. Nobody stopped. Nobody looked twice. She'd clearly been sitting there long enough to become part of the scenery, absorbed into the market the way a broken crate gets absorbed, just another discarded thing nobody had bothered to haul away. He understood what the sign meant. Not free like liberated. Free like abandoned. Whoever had chained her here had decided she wasn't worth the fuel to move or the rations to keep alive. A line item written off. Dax shifted his weight, glanced at the time on his wrist slate. The regulator was 4 stalls further down. His ship, the Salt Hauler, sat docked with a cracked intake seal that would strand him here permanently if he didn't get it fixed by nightfall. He had a delivery window closing on the far side of the system. He had exactly enough credits for the part, the fuel, and nothing left over. He kept walking. 10 steps, 15. Then he stopped, because something about the shape of her not moving had lodged itself under his ribs and wouldn't let go. It wasn't pity, not really. He'd seen rougher things on rougher worlds, and kept his feet moving plenty of times before. It wasn't some sudden burst of heroism either. Whatever instinct used to push him toward those had burned out of him years ago, along with most of his faith that the universe rewarded good behavior. It was something smaller and harder to put a name to. She wasn't crying out. She wasn't rattling a cup or performing desperation the way the beggar 2 stalls back had been, catching eyes, working the crowd. She was just sitting there, silent, like she'd already run the numbers and landed on an answer. Nobody's coming. The waiting wasn't hope anymore. It was just habit, a body still going through motions the mind had long since abandoned. That was the part he couldn't walk past. Dax turned around, crossed back through the thinning crowd, and crouched down a few feet from her, close enough to be heard, far enough to not be a threat. She flinched before he said a single word. Both arms snapped up, elbows tucked tight, forearms crossing in front of her face and throat in a motion so practiced, it looked mechanical. The specific learned geometry of someone who'd been struck enough times to know exactly which parts of the body to protect first. Dax froze where he crouched. He didn't move, didn't speak, just let the noise of the market fill the space while he waited her out. Slowly, one arm lowered, then the other. Her eyes found his through the tangle of hair, a pale amber gold, ringed with exhaustion so deep they looked borrowed from somebody else's face. She studied him the way prey studies a predator, cataloging distance and exits, trying to decide if this was the moment she'd been dreading or just one more false alarm before the real one came.
He reached for the canteen clipped to his belt, her whole body locked rigid. He unscrewed the cap slowly, deliberately, and set the canteen on the ground between them, not offered, not pushed toward her, just placed there, his hands resting open on his knees where she could see them. She stared at it for a long stretch of silence, then at him, then back at the canteen. Her hand came out shaking hard enough that the chain rattled against the deck plating. She picked it up and drank, small sips first, then longer pulls, water spilling down her chin and her free hand catching it, pressing it back to her lips like it was something too precious to lose. Dax reached into his side pack and pulled out the bolt shear he carried for jammed cargo latches.
Her eyes went wide, terror flaring back to life, but he was already fitting the jaws around the link nearest her cuff. The metal resisted for a second, then gave with a crack like a gunshot. The chain dropped to the deck. She didn't move. She sat there with her wrist still raised, the cuff still locked around it, staring at her own hand like she expected the weight to come back any second. When it didn't, something shifted behind her eyes, not relief exactly, something closer to confusion, like freedom was a word in a language she'd started forgetting how to speak. "You're not chained to anything now," Dax said, his voice rougher than he meant it. "Go wherever you want." She lowered her hand into her lap and looked at him with those wrecked amber eyes. When she spoke, it came out as barely more than a rasp, the voice of someone who hadn't used it in longer than she could count. Go where? The question sat between them like a dropped weight. Dax didn't have an answer. He'd planned as far as cutting the chain and nothing further. He hadn't considered that freedom without a destination could feel like its own kind of empty cage. He stood, shouldered his pack, and turned north toward the parts stalls, telling himself the job was done. He'd given her water, cut the chain, and that was already more than anyone else in this market had bothered to do all day. Whatever came next was hers to figure out. 20 paces later, he realized she was following. Not beside him, behind, and far enough back that she could vanish into the crowd if he turned on her. Close enough, though, that she hadn't decided to disappear yet. He caught glimpses of her at the edge of his vision, a thin blue-gray shape threading between stalls without a sound. No footsteps on the gravel, despite the loose scrap underfoot a shadow testing whether his kindness had a limit and where exactly the trap was hiding. Dax reached the part stall and leaned on the counter. The vendor, a broad-shouldered Thren with too many rings crowding his fingers, laid out his stock with the practiced flourish of a man who'd been separating travelers from their credits for 3 decades. Fold coil regulators, injector housings, coupling assemblies arranged just so angled to catch the light and hide the fine print. Dax picked up a regulator marked 2nd Gen and turned it over, checking the stamp. Certified factory spec, the vendor said, already running the markup in his head. Fits any mid-range hauler drive. 1400, 900, Dax said. And we both know that's closer to fair. You wound me deeply. Supplies backed up system-wide right now. Demands through the roof. 1300 and I'm cutting my own throat doing it. Dax opened his mouth to counter when a voice cut in from behind him, low quiet, but with a precision that sliced clean through the market noise. That's a first-generation housing with the serial re-etched to look like second-gen. The weld bead on the intake collar runs 4 millimeters too wide for factory spec. It'll pass a visual check, but the thermal tolerance is rated a third lower than advertised. Put that in a mid-range drive housing and the pressure differential blows it inside 50 hours. Maybe less under sustained burn. Silence. The vendor's face cycled through several shades of discomfort. Dax turned. She stood 5 feet back, arms wrapped tight around herself, eyes fixed on the deck, already bracing for punishment for having spoken at all. Dax looked at the regulator in his hand, then at her, then at the vendor, whose expression confirmed every word she just said. 700, Dax said. For the real one you've got hidden under the counter. The deal closed in under a minute. Dax pocketed the genuine part and turned to find her still standing there, still not meeting his eyes, bare feet gray with dust on the scrap-littered deck. He studied her, the gaunt frame, the scarred wrists, the coiled posture of someone braced for a blow that hadn't landed yet, and behind all of it, a pair of eyes that had just stripped down a piece of engineered hardware and caught the fraud faster than he could finish haggling. "You got a name?" he asked. She went quiet long enough that he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, softly, like trying on a piece of clothing she hadn't worn in years and wasn't sure still fit. "Kalis. Dax Marrow. I've got a ship docked in Bay 11 that apparently has more wrong with it than I thought. Could use a second set of eyes." He didn't frame it as charity. Didn't frame it as rescue. He offered it like a job, one professional to another, and something flickered behind her eyes that might have been the first ember of a fire that had been stamped out a very long time ago. The salt hauler was a mid-range freighter, older than Dax liked admitting out loud. Its hull plates came from a dozen mismatched repair jobs, each patch a slightly different shade of gray, giving the whole ship the look of a quilt stitched together by someone who'd stopped caring about appearances around the 4th repair. The stabilizer fin had developed a vibration he'd been ignoring for the better part of a year. The galley heater ran 3 degrees hotter than it should. The lights in the crew quarters flickered on a schedule he'd learned to sleep straight through. It wasn't much to look at, but it was paid off, fully his, after 7 years of runs ranging from legal to questionable, to things he tried not to think about at 3 in the morning. The one thing in his life that belonged to him outright. Kalis stood frozen in the cargo bay when they boarded. Her eyes tracked the overhead conduits, the junction boxes, the power routing along the bulkheads, reading the ship the way some people read faces, automatically, compulsively, her gaze chasing every system down to its source, but her hands stayed pinned at her sides. She looked. She didn't touch. Waiting for permission her body wasn't sure was coming. Dax warmed a ration pack and set it in front of her at the galley table with a cup of clean water. She reached with both hands, then caught herself, slowed her breathing, and picked up the food with deliberate control. A measured bite, a pause, another measured bite. The rhythm of someone who'd learned, somewhere along the way, that eating too fast got the food taken away. That hunger itself was a privilege that could vanish the moment you drew too much attention to it. Dax sat across from her, pretended to review his manifest, and said nothing, letting her eat at whatever pace felt safe. When she finished, he showed her the spare bunk, a narrow cot, a foam pad, an empty storage locker, bare walls, nothing personal. He pulled a thermal blanket from the locker and held it out. Standard issue, nothing fancy. She stared at it. Her hand rose slowly, took the edge of the fabric between 2 fingers and held it there, waiting for the condition, the catch, the voice that would tell her what she now owed for it. When no voice came, her fingers tightened and pulled the blanket to her chest, and she stood there holding it, looking at him with an expression that cracked something open in his chest he'd have sworn was solid. "Get some rest," he said. "We'll figure the rest out in the morning." He left her there and went up to the cockpit, sat in the pilot's chair, and stared at the console readouts, without really seeing them for a long time. 3 hours later, he heard movement not from the bunk, but from the engine room. He found her standing in front of the main power distribution panel, hands hovering an inch from the surface without touching, eyes moving in fast, systematic sweeps across circuits and conduit paths like she was reading a language she'd been forbidden to speak for years and had just remembered how to pronounce. She'd pulled her hair back with a scrap of cloth, and in the amber wash of the engine room lighting, With the grime rinsed from her face and her focus fully engaged, she looked like an entirely different person. Not smaller, not broken alive in a way he hadn't seen from her since the market. "Your secondary scrubber membrane is cracked," she said without turning around. "That's why your recycler's working double time. Your port power coupling is phase drifting by a fraction of a percent, not critical yet. But in about 2 weeks, it starts cascading into your nav array, and your injection timing's off by several microseconds a cycle, which means you're burning roughly 7% more fuel than you need to on every run." Dax leaned against the doorframe. "Anything else?" "Your stabilizer's got a harmonic resonance in the mounting bracket. That's the vibration. Been meaning to look at that." 20 minutes with the right shim. Her hands still hadn't touched anything. Even here, diagnosing problems on a ship that wasn't hers with a fluency that was clearly bone dip. She wouldn't reach without being told she could. "What did you do before all this?" Dax asked. Her face shut like a hatch ceiling. The light went out of it instantly. She lowered her hands, wrapped her arms around herself in that same protective fold he'd seen in the market. "I built things," she said. "Other people took them." She turned and went back to the bunk without another word. Morning arrived through the cockpit viewport as a slow bleed of starlight against black. Dax woke to a recycler humming at a frequency he'd never heard from it before. Cleaner, smoother, like the difference between a clogged throat and clear lungs. The readout showed air quality up nearly a fifth overnight. He found Kalis on the engine room floor, cross-legged tools arranged around her in a precise semicircle. She'd raided his maintenance kit and was fitting a patch she'd fabricated from cargo bay scrap into the cracked scrubber membrane. Her hands moved with a certainty that had nothing to do with confidence and everything to do with deep practiced skill. This was what she was, underneath the chain and the sign, and however many years had passed between. She looked up as he entered. She didn't flinch. Something in Dax's chest loosened, a tension he hadn't consciously known he was carrying. "Breakfast?" he offered. They ate together in the galley in comfortable silence, and this time she moved through the meal with less of the rigid control from the night before. Halfway through, she set her cup down. "I'm Ilvanari," she said. "My home cluster was annexed by the Austrians combined 11 years ago. Most of my people were scattered, resettled into labor pools across the frontier systems. We were engineers, systems architects, designers. The Combine wanted our expertise. They never wanted us not as people, just as a resource to extract and discard." Dax nodded slowly. He knew the broad shape of it. The Austrians Combine ran itself like a government wearing a corporation's face, or maybe the other way around, absorbing smaller systems for 2 decades running, always through some legal loophole, always dressed up in language about efficiency and optimization that sounded reasonable right up until you noticed it applied to entire populations the same way it applied to production quotas. "I worked in a combine propulsion division," Kalis continued, her voice steadying now that she was on technical ground, the place where she was most herself. "I developed a new drive architecture, a fold lattice configuration that could cut fuel consumption in civilian fleets by nearly half. Cheaper travel, longer range for smaller ships. It would have reshaped independent trade across the whole frontier. Haulers like yours could have doubled their operating range without burning more fuel to do it." She paused. The next part clearly cost her something to say. "They filed the patent under a Combine-approved engineer's name. Scrubbed me out of every document, every file, every version history. When I raised it through internal channels, they revoked my work clearance. When I went outside those channels, they sold my labor contract to a mining operation on the outer belt." Her voice stayed flat, controlled, which somehow made it worse than if she'd broken down crying, because it meant she told herself this story enough times that the sharp edges had worn smooth. The mining operation didn't need an engineer. They needed bodies for extraction. 12-hour shifts cutting mineral seams in low-gravity tunnels. When I couldn't hit quota, they cut my rations. When I still couldn't hit it, they traded me to a freight outfit. She said it the way you describe a supply chain. Goods in, goods out, damaged inventory marked down. That outfit lost a contract and liquidated its assets.
I was sold twice more after that, each time to someone who knew less about me than the last owner had. By the final transfer, my file didn't even list my species correctly. I was a body with a number attached. She looked down at her hands on the table, calluses from tool work layered over old scars from restraints, layered over newer calluses from whatever labor she'd been forced into. Once nobody left realized she was an engineer capable of rewriting how civilian ships flew. By the end, I wasn't even a name. I was an asset code, V4417, property to be transferred, depreciated, or written off. And the sign, Dax said quietly, "My last owner ran a supply depot here on the drift. When his operation folded, he chained me to that post because he couldn't find a buyer."
My species is classified as low-value labor in this region, not strong enough for heavy extraction work. She stopped. Her jaw tightened, something dark moving behind her eyes. Not desirable enough for anything else either. Dax's hands curled into fists under the table. He kept them there, kept his voice level. "How long were you at that post?" 9 days. 9 days chained in that market with no food and whatever moisture collected in the cuff. 9 days of foot traffic stepping around her like she was cargo that had simply been left in the wrong spot. Something cold and precise settled behind Dax's sternum. Not rage, exactly. Something quieter and more dangerous. The kind of anger that doesn't burn hot because it doesn't burn at all. It just hardens. "The drive," he said. The fold lattice design. 4 months ago, a combine engineer named Voss Halbrecht took the Meridian Innovation Prize for it. I watched the broadcast. "You're not angry about the prize. I'm angry about what they did with the design." Her voice cracked, flatness giving way to something raw underneath, the first uncontrolled emotion he'd heard from her yet. "I built it for civilian freight. Cheaper transport, affordable passage for frontier families who spend half their income just getting between systems. They've been retooling it for military application, fast strike deployment, long-range interdiction. That drive was supposed to bring people closer together, not help gunships reach someone's homework faster." An alarm sliced through the galley's sharp, insistent. Dax was on his feet before the second pulse finished, moving for the cockpit with Kalis half a step behind him. The proximity scanner showed a contact closing fast from the direction of the drift. Dax pulled the signature profile and felt his stomach drop. Ostrus compliance. Light pursuit class, fast, heavily armed, built for exactly one purpose. "They found me," Kalis said, voice gone hollow, the fear returning instantly, draining what little color remained in her face. Her arms crossed over her chest, the flinch reflex snapping back into place. "They found us," Dax corrected. "Different problem." The comm crackled to life. A voice clipped and corporate, in the specific way corporate authority always sounded, filled the cockpit.
"Unregistered freighter. This is Ostrus Compliance Unit 7. You are harboring stolen corporate property. Power down and prepare for retrieval of asset. V4417. Non-compliance will result in disabling action." Dax looked at Kalis. She stood rigid in the cockpit doorway, arms locked around herself, eyes fixed on some point where the past and present had folded into a single unbearable moment. The number, not her name. Never her name, just a line item in somebody's inventory system. He opened the channel. "Nobody on this ship answers to that designation. You've got the wrong vessel." He killed the connection. A warning shot rocked the salt hauler hard enough to rattle every panel in the cockpit.
Dax grabbed the controls and pushed the engines to full burn, feeling the frame groan under the strain. The compliance ship was faster, better armed, better maintained. In open space, this ended one way. The cinder field, Kalis said, already sliding into the co-pilot seat without waiting to be asked. 35 minutes at full burn, heading 214. The charged particle discharge in there will degrade their targeting array by more than half. Their intercept algorithm is built for open space pursuit, not debris navigation. Dax adjusted course without hesitation. The cinder field bloomed across the viewport moments later, a vast graveyard of shattered hulls and crackling electromagnetic storms, wreckage from a war fought 2 generations back.
Dead ships drifted in slow rotation, silhouettes lit from within by discharged sheets of raw energy. Most pilots gave the field a wide berth, the ones who didn't tended to become part of the wreckage themselves. Dax flew straight into it. The salt hauler shuddered as charged particles raked across the shields. Behind them, the pursuit ship followed, weapons firing, but the shots scattered wide as interference chewed through its targeting precision. Dax threaded the freighter between the gutted husk of a destroyed cruiser and a spinning slab of hull plating the size of a building. Roll 15 degrees left, then cut thrust for 2 seconds, Kalis said.
She wasn't guessing, she was reading the ship's capability against the environment in real time, running calculations that should have needed a dedicated nav computer. Gap in the particle density at bearing 311. Slide through it, and you've got a clean corridor for half a click. Dax rolled, cut thrust, felt the ship slip through the gap with centimeters to spare on either side. Behind them, the compliance vessel plowed straight into a dense pocket of discharge, its shields flaring bright enough to light the whole debris field for a full second. Another hit rocked the salt hauler. Port shields buckled. A conduit blew somewhere aft, filling the cockpit with the smell of burned insulation. Warning lights cascaded red across the console. "I need to get to the engine room," Kayla said. "Already moving. Go." She dropped out of the seat and vanished down the corridor. 30 seconds later, her voice came through the internal comm, calm despite the shaking hull around her. "Rerouting auxiliary power to the port shield emitter. You're going to lose gravity on the lower deck for about 90 seconds. When I say cut every engine, main thrust, maneuvering, stabilizers, all of it. Cut engines in a debris field with a warship on our tail. Trust me, 2 words, no drama, no emphasis, a simple ask from a woman who had every reason to trust nobody and was instead asking him to trust her. Now," she said. He cut the engines. The salt hauler went dark and silent, drifting on pure momentum through the storm. Without active systems, its energy signature dropped to almost nothing. On the scanner, Dax watched Kalis's improvisation take shape, rerouted power bouncing a false echo off the charged particles, painting a phantom signature 300 meters off their starboard side. The compliance ship's already degraded targeting locked onto the Ghost, banked hard toward the false reading, and flew straight into a pocket of wreckage. The impact wasn't catastrophic, but it didn't need to be. Structural damage to the forward sensor array, a secondary flare from what looked like a weapons pod. The pursuit ship shuddered, stabilized, and began a slow retreat out of the field, limping back towards safer space. Dax sat in the dark cockpit and listened to the silence. Then the engines came back online, one system at a time, as Kalis restored power from the engine room with the same careful precision of someone reassembling an instrument after a performance. She appeared in the cockpit doorway 5 minutes later, hands black with coolant, a smear across one cheek, hair loose from its tie, and catching the emergency lighting in pale strands. And she was smiling barely, a small thing more visible in her eyes than her mouth, like a chute pushing up through cracked pavement. But real, the first genuine expression he'd seen from her since the market. The first thing that wasn't fear or blankness, or the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned that showing anything at all could get it taken away. She'd saved them both. Not by fighting, not by running, but by understanding a ship she'd been aboard less than 2 days better than the man who'd flown it for 7 years, and by trusting her own judgment enough to act on it. "You could have let them take me," she said. "Would have been less damage to the ship." Dax didn't look up from the console. "Ship can be fixed." They docked at a small automated refueling way station on the far side of the field to patch the worst of the damage. Gray corridors, buzzing lights. The flat taste of recycled air that had cycled through too many filters too many times. Theirs was the only ship in the bay. After 2 days of alarms and weapons fire and engines pushed past their limits, the quiet felt almost physical, pressing in from every direction like deep water. Working the hull side by side, something shifted between them. Nothing dramatic, no single moment he could point to and say that's when it changed. It built instead from 100 small exchanges stacking on top of each other. Kalis stopped flinching when Dax reached across her for a tool. He stopped exaggerating every movement to telegraph it in advance. They fell into a rhythm neither one planned or mentioned out loud, the kind of unspoken coordination that usually takes a crew months to build. She handed him components before he asked, already 3 steps ahead in the repair sequence. He braced panels for her without being told where to stand. 2 people who'd learned each other's cadence in under 2 days. The way musicians lock into rhythm before the first chorus even starts. Dax caught himself watching her hands, the way they moved with purpose, every motion serving a function. The scars on her wrists seemed to disappear whenever she was elbow deep in a junction box. Not literally, but they stopped being the first thing his eye landed on. What he saw instead was competence, intelligence, A woman the galaxy had decided was worth less than a length of chain, methodically rebuilding his ship with nothing but skill and salvage and whatever part of herself nobody had ever managed to take. That night, they sat in the cargo bay with the outer hatch cracked, the containment membrane humming faintly as it held vacuum at bay. The stars of the frontier spilled across the opening in a dense, unbroken field. No planets, no stations, just distance and light, and the hum of a ship running smoother than it had in years. "Why'd you stop?" Kalis asked. Dax was quiet a long while. It was the kind of question that deserved an honest answer, and honest answers were always the ones that took longest to find. He thought about his father, gone 8 years now, a man who'd worked cargo docks his whole life and never once walked past someone asking for help, even when they hadn't technically asked. Especially then, his father had a theory about it. The people who need help the most are the ones who've stopped believing it exists, so they've stopped asking for it. You have to go find them instead. He thought about the version of himself who'd landed on Pharaoh's Drift that morning, a man who kept his head down, his contracts tight, his life as small and portable as possible, because small things were harder to lose. He'd gotten good at not caring, efficient at walking past, and then he'd taken 10 steps, 15, and something he couldn't quite name. Something that sounded a lot like his father's voice at the back of his skull had grabbed him by the spine and turned him around. "Because you weren't asking anyone to," he said finally. She looked over at him. Everyone else in that market who needed something was calling out for it, begging, selling, shouting. You were just sitting there like you'd already decided nobody was coming, and the waiting was just what you did now. He paused. "I couldn't walk past someone who'd given up on being seen." Her eyes filled. The tears didn't fall, held back through sheer will, habit, the last scraps of a dignity that had survived everything else done to her. "I had given up," she said quietly. She told him the rest, not the facts this time, but the thing underneath the facts that the facts alone couldn't carry. The colleagues at the Combine who knew her work was being stolen and looked away, because looking would have cost them their own positions. The appeals filed through official channels that vanished into a silence, so total it felt deliberate. The slow, patient, thorough erosion of her belief that she mattered, that her mind mattered, that the things she'd designed and the name she'd signed to them meant anything at all. In a galaxy that seemed built specifically to prove otherwise, by the time I was chained to that post, she said, voice low and steady, I'd started agreeing with the sign. Free meant surplus. Free meant nobody wants this. It meant I'd been weighed by every system I ever passed through and found lacking, not useful enough, not strong enough, not worth even the cost of selling. She looked at her hands in her lap, the same hands that had redesigned interstellar propulsion. "The worst part isn't the chain," she said. "The chain's just metal. The worst part is when you start doing their work for them. When the voice telling you your nothing stops being theirs and starts being yours. When you're sitting at that post and you don't even pull against the chain anymore because some part of you has started believing it belongs there, that you belong there, that the sign is accurate." Her fingers twisted together, knuckles going pale. "I was free because I was worthless. And the most terrifying thing about what you did in that market wasn't the bolt shear. It was the canteen. Because you set it down like I was a person who deserved water, and I didn't know what to do with that." Dax didn't argue with her, didn't tell her she was wrong. Didn't launch into a speech about her worth or her brilliance, or the injustice of what had been done to her. Speeches were cheap, and she'd already heard enough empty ones to fill a cargo hold twice over. Words hadn't gotten her off that post. A bolt shear had. Sometimes the simplest thing is the only thing that actually means something. He held out his hand instead, palm up, open, the same gesture from the market. The canteen set down between them without conditions attached. Take it or don't. Your call. No strings either way. Kalis looked at his hand. The cargo bay hummed around them. Stars burned steady through the open hatch. The hull ticked and settled as it cooled in the way station's shadow. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers. Neither of them said anything else. They sat there with their hands joined and the stars pouring in and the silence full of everything they hadn't said yet but might. Someday, given time. Later, she fell asleep sitting upright, head tipped against the bulkhead. Dax pulled the thermal blanket from the storage bench and draped it over her shoulders. She didn't startle awake to check it for conditions this time. In her sleep, her hand found the edge of the fabric and pulled it closer. A small, unconscious gesture that landed harder than anything she'd said out loud all night. Morning brought a new signal on the scanner. Dax frowned at the readout, ran the signature twice to be sure. not compliance. A civilian frequency, a distress call broadcasting on the Ilvanari emergency channel, cycling through basic encryption with a kind of desperation that no longer cared who picked it up. A refugee convoy, 6 transport ships lightly armed under attack. Kalis was already in the cockpit when he turned around, having heard the signal from the engine room and come running. Her face had transformed. The blankness was gone. The fear was gone. What replaced them was something he hadn't seen from her yet. Anger. Not the cold, clenched kind from the galley the night before. Something brighter. Something with direction. "Those are my people," she said. Dax pulled up the tactical scan. 2 compliance vessels circling the convoy in a coordinated pattern. Boarding actions already underway on at least 2 of the 6 transports. Same corporate markings as the ship that had chased them through the field. They were seizing Ilvanari transports. "We can't take on 2 enforcement ships," Dax said, laying it out plainly. The salt hauler was a cargo freighter, with jury-rigged shields and a single defensive turret he'd fired in anger exactly, once in 7 years. Against 1 compliance vessel, they'd had Kalis's ingenuity and a debris field working in their favor. Against 2, in open space, they had nothing. "We can run," he said. "Nobody would blame you for it." Kalis's jaw set. Her hands on the console were steady for the first time since he'd known her. Not trembling, not gripping too tight, just still with the particular calm of someone who has already made a decision and is done deliberating. "I spent 2 years letting other people decide what I'm worth," she said. "I'm done." She pulled up the communication array and started working, fingers moving across the console with the same speed and certainty he'd seen in the engine room, sharpened now by something fiercer. "The original drive schematics," she said. "Every calculation, every design iteration from first concept to final spec, it's all still in my head. They took my tools, they took my clearance, they took my name off the patent. But they couldn't take the work itself, because the work is me." She looked at him, eyes steady, no trembling left in them at all. "I'm going to broadcast all of it. Open channel, every ship in range. Complete original design, biometric proof of authorship, timestamps that predate the Combine's filing by 2 full years. Once it hits the network, it propagates. It can't be recalled, it can't be deleted. The patent collapses, the theft gets exposed, and the design finally goes where I always meant it to go, into the hands of anyone who needs it." Dax understood the stakes immediately. You'll be handing over the most valuable propulsion tech in a generation. For free. Something shifted across her face at that word. Free. The same word that had been scratched into a sign wired to her chain.
Except now it meant something entirely different, something she was choosing. "I built it to be free," she said quietly. "So ships like yours could fly farther on less fuel, so frontier families could actually afford passage between systems. The Combine locked it behind a stolen patent and turned it into a weapon instead. Putting it on the open network is exactly what I should have done from the start. It'll also make you the most wanted person in this sector." "I was already chained to a post," she said. "How much worse can it get?" Dax held her gaze a moment longer, then turned the salt hauler toward the convoy. They closed fast. Both compliance ships picked them up instantly, weapons locking, the comm filling again with the same clipped corporate language.
"Unregistered vessel, you're interfering with a lawful enforcement action. Surrender asset V4417 immediately, or you will be fired upon." Dax opened a channel, not to the compliance ships, but to everyone. Every ship in range, every relay station, every passive receiver within broadcast distance. "Her name is Kalis," he said, "and she's got something to say." She hit transmit. The data tore across the network, schematics first, then the mathematical proofs, then the timestamps, the biometric verification, the iteration logs written in her own idiom, in her own voice, the unmistakable fingerprint of a mind working a problem across months and years. The entire architecture of the fold lattice drive, its true origin and the full evidence of its theft, hitting every receiver in the sector at once. Dax watched her work the console. Her face had gone still. No fear left in it, no rage either, just a focused, absolute clarity he recognized from the engine room. Except this time she wasn't patching a scrubber or rerouting a shield, she was doing something bigger. She was taking her name back not by asking permission,
Not by filing an appeal into a silence that would swallow it whole, but by stating the truth loud enough across the whole network that nobody could pretend not to have heard it. The convoy ships picked it up. The compliance ships picked it up.
Trade stations and freighters and relay nodes caught the signal and pushed it further outward, propagating at the speed of light, irreversible, unkillable. You could destroy the woman. You could scrap the ship. You could not, under any circumstance, unbroadcast something already loose on the network. The compliance officer's voice came back through the comm, stripped of its earlier composure. Cease transmission. This is unauthorized distribution of proprietary corporate property. This is a criminal act. Kalis didn't answer. She was still transmitting the last of the data package, her name, her work, her identity, pushed out into a universe where no one could chain it to a post again, or stamp a number over it, or pretend it belonged to somebody else. The compliance ships opened fire. The salt hauler rocked hard. Shields flared, a panel blew, and Dax threw the ship into evasive maneuvers, but the enforcement vessels were closing from both flanks now. Weapons cycling for a volley, the freighter had no chance of surviving. Then the convoy answered. 6 Ilvanari transport ships, battered, barely armed, crewed by refugees who'd already lost one homeworld, broke formation and fanned out between the salt hauler and the compliance vessels. Their point defense systems opened up in coordinated bursts, forcing the enforcement ships into evasive breaks of their own. These weren't military vessels. They were freighters and passenger transports, crewed by people who'd spent years running and had finally, in this moment, decided they were finished with it. People who just received a broadcast telling them one of their own was aboard that cargo hauler, that her stolen work was being handed back to the galaxy, that someone was fighting for them and needed help doing it. Desperate people, it turned out, made dangerous allies. Outnumbered, and with a broadcast already spreading well past any hope of containment, the compliance ships broke off and retreated toward the system's edge, engines flaring in a hasty withdrawal. Silence settled over the comm channel, then a voice old, rough, cracking at the edges. "Kalis, is that you?" She closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were bright with something Dax had no word for, something bigger than relief and older than joy. "It's me." The convoy regrouped. Ilvanari elders hailed the salt hauler and spoke to her in their own language, voices layered with an emotion that didn't need translating. They invited her aboard the lead transport, her people, her language, her name spoken by voices that had known it before it ever became a number. She could go with them. Her work was hers again. Her name was hers again. A whole community wanted her back. Dax was in the engine room when she found him, already elbow deep in repairs, pulling a scorched panel free to reach the conduit underneath. Keeping his hands busy was deliberate. Busy hands didn't have to acknowledge how different the ship felt with her aboard it, and how different it would feel without her. "Convoy's waiting," he said, not looking up. "Headed for an Ilvanari settlement out past the Drift Cluster. Sounds like a good place to land." Kalis stood in the doorway, the same doorway where she'd first hovered without touching anything, hands an inch from the panel, waiting for permission that hadn't come yet. The same room where she'd rerouted power with bare hands while plasma fires shook the hull apart around them. She picked up a wrench from the tool rack. Dax stopped working. She knelt beside him, fitted the wrench to the bolt he'd been fighting, loosened it in a single smooth motion, and set it back down. Looked at him. "I'm not here because I owe you," she said. "I'm not here because I've got nowhere else to go. I have somewhere." "I have my people, my name, my work. A convoy that would take me in today if I asked." Her hand found his grimy with coolant, calloused from tools and scars and years of holding on to nothing at all. "I'm here because you set a canteen on the ground and walked away, gave me water and cut my chain and didn't ask for a single thing in return. Nobody's ever chosen me without wanting something back. Nobody's ever offered anything without a condition attached." Her fingers tightened around his. "So I'm choosing you, without conditions, because that's what free actually means." Dax looked at her, at the amber eyes that had stopped hoping and were now, carefully, learning to start again, at the hands that had redesigned Starflight and spent 2 years holding nothing heavier than a chain, at the woman who'd been weighed and measured and discarded by every system she'd ever passed through, and had finally decided on her own terms, in her own time, that she was done agreeing with their math. He nodded, went back to work, but his hand found hers for a moment, brief, warm, calloused fingers against calloused fingers. The texture of two people who'd spent their whole lives fixing things and building things and holding onto whatever they could reach. Then they were both fixing the ship again together, shoulder to shoulder on the engine room floor, passing tools back and forth without needing to ask. The rhythm already there, already established, already theirs. The salt hauler pulled away from the convoy as the Ilvanari transports formed up for the journey to the settlement cluster. Kalis stood at the cockpit viewport and watched them go. Her people headed for safety, carrying her work in their databanks. A gift finally given the way it was always meant to be given. Somewhere out there on trade stations and in ship berths and in the workshops of independent engineers across a dozen systems, her schematics were already spreading, downloaded, studied, understood. The fold lattice drive, free of the patent that had tried to cage it, beginning the slow work of changing the frontier one ship at a time. One family at a time, one longer, cheaper, more possible journey at a time. Dax set a course for open space, no particular destination. Just forward. The engines ran smoother than they had in years. The recycler hummed clean. The stabilizer sat silent for the first time since he'd bought the ship, fixed with a shim Kalis had fabricated and installed in under 20 minutes. Two people, one ship. The chain was gone. The sign was gone. What remained was a woman with her name back, her hands finally resting on the machines she'd been built to understand, and a man who'd done nothing more remarkable than stopping, on an ordinary day when nobody had asked him to. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything.